So let me get this straight. You understand that war between our nations is pointless and unprofitable for both sides, and yet you are doing nothing to prevent it. You have very odd definition of nothing, Mr. Daniłowicz. Have our armies bothered yours? Have our fleets, with exception of one overzealous man who already got punished for it, disrupted your trade? I can assure you we are more than capable of throwing a wrench into your plans, but so far the Great Council did its best to keep their more militant members on the leash. But unfortunately, unless certain matters are resolved, we can't guarantee anything. And those matters are? Well, most of them are between the Great Council and Emperor Leopold. The most outstanding one is of course matter of imperial debt. Over these last 12 years, House of Habsburg borrowed a significant sum of gulden from our republic. It was an investment that, we hoped, would pay for itself, but today, with imperial forces in full retreat, we can clearly say it was a mistake. Which, of course, means that a significant number of council members are willing to resort to military force to get their money back. And how is that our problem? It's obvious that Leopold can't pay back now, not while most of his country is occupied and he himself hides besieged in Vienna. That puts Venetian Council in a precarious position. They cannot break the alliance, join our side and take their gold back by force, not without exposing themselves to threats all around their borders. But they also cannot simply wait, because once Austria falls, their debts will cease to exist. There is only one party that has enough gold to take care of this debt, the Commonwealth. And I'm willing to bet all those mercenaries around Venice are there to convince us that imperial debts are in fact our problem. Correct? I'm glad you understand that, while there is no bad blood between us, we simply have to protect our interests with force if necessary. Should you, however, take care of Leopold's debt, I'm sure this war could be resolved without pointless bloodshed. The amount is significant, of course, but I'm sure we can work something out. Very well. I will present your offer in the assembly tomorrow, and I will personally write to convince President Stolarski of its merit. Should I come with you? It would be better if a man responsible for our finances did most of the explaining. I agree, but no. It would be best if you stayed in Warsaw after that stunt with Poniatowski. No, do not insult our intellects by denying, friend. You should know by now that I have my eyes and ears everywhere. If it's any consolation, my agents claim you were the toughest mark so far, and if not for one very minor mistake of some junior accountant of yours, you would have gotten away with it. Still, if my men found out, then it's only a matter of time before others catch the scent. Stolarski could probably overlook the embezzlement of Republican funds, especially considering how much more your work earned us, but not on behalf of Poniatowski, so you should stay as far away from our dear president as you can. And besides, so far it's nothing certain, only a whisper in the wind. But if rumors about Poniatowski's actions in Britain turn out to be true, let's just say that responsibility for financial frauds will be the least of your problems. You've unleashed a madman, Józef, a madman who cannot be controlled, not by me, not by you, not by anyone. He was supposed to rot away in Russia, far away from trouble, but now you've given him a weapon he will use to destroy our name around the world. If my agents confirm these rumors, then Stolarski will not let you live. The wheels will turn and the Commonwealth will behead you. So, if it comes to this, here's my advice. Return to the treasury and continue your work. Finish everything you have to, seal the records, take your personal money and leave. Disappear. I know you're smart enough to cover your tracks. Stolarski will order me and Jastrovic to track you down, of course, but we'll make sure he'll never find you. You know I only did what I thought best for the Commonwealth. But nonetheless, thank you, Rościsław. Truly. Do not thank me. If that was someone else, I wouldn't hesitate for a second to turn you in for this. But I've already lost one friend and I don't want to lose another. So go, and in case we never see each other again, good luck out there. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Crownless Eagle. Last time we managed to blitz our way across Austrian heartlands and we captured Bavaria and Croatia, effectively cutting Austrian capital off from the rest of their land. That, however, forced us to spread our forces around a very wide area, and there was a possibility that Venetians, who currently are the most powerful nation in the region, could wake up and finally check our advance. But as you can see here, it's the next turn and their forces haven't moved an inch. They're still entrenched in and around Venice itself, defending various towns and villages, but aside from that we haven't seen any other actions from them. It seems that, even though they were obliged to join the war on Leopold's side, Italian merchants aren't that eager to actually commit to it, which, while anticlimactic, is very good for us, because it will allow our forces to move around Austria without fear of counterattack, for now at least. As for other news, it seems that Ottomans realized that they really pissed us off by taking Pressburg right from under our noses, and the army that committed that cheeky land grab has backed off, towards that Starfort our own forces were using 2 months ago. And that means that, for now, there is no reason to rush Vienna, and we can continue the siege at our leisure and keep Stolarski and his men out of danger. And, unless something changes, in 3 months garrison of Austrian capital will have only 3 options: surrender to us, starve, or try to sally out and break through our encirclement. With luck, we'll be able to put Habsburg Emperor to justice without losing a man. But while our president is busy with the siege, our other commanders have more work to do. As mentioned before, Venetians keep their forces concentrated around their capital, but that doesn't mean we can just ignore them. After all, they could march out at any time, and we need to be ready for them. So, our generals decided to place their armies in a way that would block Venetian forces from reaching Vienna. In Croatia, General Rybak first moved towards the Alps, but then realized that, while it is possible for our enemies to march across the mountains, it is far more probable they would just try to take the road which moves directly through Zagreb, the city he had just captured. So, our general turned back and camped his men in a forested area overlooking the road, hoping that woods will hide his men from enemy sight. In Bavaria, General Tomaka had an easier job. After looting Innsbruck seminary together with his men, he marched towards Tyrol, an area known for its iron mines, and made camp there, effectively cutting off the main valley Venetian forces could use to march across the Alps. Technically, there is a second valley they could use, and it leads almost straight to Vienna no less, but it's so remote that marching through it would take our enemies at least 2 or 3 months, giving us more than enough time to respond. Also, another one of our generals, one Stanisław Bugajski, who was up to this point keeping our earlier conquests under control, is finally going to join in. His troops marched south, raided rich gold mines south of Danube, and then moved towards Munich, ready to support Commander Mickiewicz and his slightly depleted force of warriors. But as Bugajski's men were approaching the capital of Bavaria, our war chief was already busy with something else. Encouraged by their earlier victories, our warriors were so eager to continue their attack, they decided to not wait for reinforcements and moved further west towards Stuttgart, capital of Württemberg. Our men expected another bloodless victory there, but their hopes were quickly dashed when they realized that, aside from Stuttgart garrison, Austrians have yet another army encamped nearby and ready to help, and together they outnumber our native foes by 1,500 men, which is certainly enough to stop our warriors in their tracks. For a while, Mickiewicz considered a tactical retreat, but then decided that he can at the very least surround the city and wait for now. If Austrians decide to attack us, we can always leg it. And now for our unexpected front. After landing in Scotland, Poniatowski and his men faced almost no resistance. They managed to march across the Highlands without trouble, and now they have reached the fortress overlooking Edinburgh, the most important city in the area. And as you were able to see there, we have our enemies completely outnumbered. But there is one issue. See, because Poniatowski's action is unsanctioned by the Commonwealth, he can expect no reinforcements from home, and even if he could, there is no one to transport them. The mysterious fleet which transported him to Scotland has already sailed off to pursue their main objective. So that means that every man we lose in our campaign in Britain is going to be lost permanently. No replenishments will come in to fill the ranks. Now, I could theoretically auto-resolve this siege, but I'm sure the game will make me lose far more men than I would by fighting the battle myself. And on the other hand, I really dislike sieges, especially with all the bugs that come with them. So I spent a few moments thinking, and finally, after quick-saving like a coward, I decided to fight the battle myself, for which I was rewarded with the absolute best loading screen quote in Total War history. I may dislike you for defeating my favorite historical figure, Mr. Wellesley, but that is a good one. The battle began on a surprisingly nice day, nice for Scotland anyway, but as you can see in the distance, there is going to be some raining in this fight, namely raining quicklime. While commander of our colonial forces might have some reservations about using it, Poniatowski simply doesn't care. If something can be used to take out his enemies, he is going to use it, no matter the consequences. So, defenders of Edinburgh are in for a very painful day. Now, I'm not going to show you the majority of this battle, but let me just say this. It took way more time than it should. We had a simple plan. First, we blasted 2 holes in enemy walls and annihilated enemy dragoon company that was sent on a suicide mission to silence our artillery. Then we sent 4 infantry companies towards the breach, while the rest of our men flanked the fort, our light infantry from the south and light infantry and horsemen from the north. and everything looked fine. British commander deployed only a single unit of armed citizenry to protect that breach, so I expected my men would just deal with them in a matter of seconds and push further inside the fort. But unfortunately, our enemies decided to make the best of their chance, and as our men poured through the breach, enemy mob fired an extremely deadly volley right into our faces, killing several officers in the process. But more importantly, this volley was so impressive that the Elder Ones themselves took notice and gathered to observe the battle. And that, of course, meant that reality itself was warped beyond recognition, and soon enough time itself started working against us by randomly slowing down and speeding up. So now, a battle that seemed easy just a minute ago turned into a race against time. We had to win this battle quickly, or else the very fabric of reality could collapse. No pressure. And we tried to do just that. Despite all the timey-wimey stuff going absolutely crazy around the fort, our men mustered enough willpower and powered through towards the main square, where enemy commander Pope, clearly a cultist of the Elder Gods, was stationed protecting the banner of his fortress and several gun crews. But you can see here just how difficult it is for our men, and for Scottish soldiers as well for that matter, to even move, let alone fight in this time anomaly. Even worse, it was almost impossible to direct the battle. Our officers were simply unable to give any orders without moving forward in time every second. And it's a true sign of quality of Poniatowski's army. Our other forces, continental or colonial ones, would have without a doubt escaped after seeing such madness right in front of them, but Poniatowski's men pushed on. Maybe they're more terrified of their commander than the Elder Ones. But regardless, we pressed on. Over 4 minutes passed outside the fort, while inside it was only about 50 seconds. Poniatowski was so desperate he was willing to call off the attack, but just as he opened his mouth to issue an order to retreat, someone somewhere in the fort managed to finally slay Commander Pope, and his incantation to the Dark Ones was cut short. For a moment there it seemed we were too late. Time was still jittery, but with every second the Elder Ones were pushed further and further away. And finally, as their servant let out his last breath, the curse was broken. Time warp was dispelled, and our men were once again able to move freely without traveling through neighboring dimensions every second. Seeing that they've managed to save the world from invasion of unspeakable evil, our men raised a thunderous cheer and continued their attack with renewed vigor. Half a minute later, the fortress was ours. So, with dimensional crisis averted, we can take a quick look at the battle results, and as expected, they are much better than anything auto-resolve would give us. We've lost only 150 men, and no doubt this number would have been smaller if not for the time warp, as there were some occasions where I was unable to attack or defend properly because it was impossible to give any orders to my units. But still, the capital of Scotland and the region itself are ours, and now Poniatowski can begin the second part of his plan: burn the city and sold the land. Basically, his men are ordered to set fire to every building they can find, be it military barracks, a seat of local government or a civilian home. Edinburgh will be razed to the ground, and its people, those who won't escape our forces, will be given a choice: join Poniatowski in his campaign or die. We will even send outriders to burn towns and villages in the countryside, and once we are done, we will head south to do the same thing with London. But for now, we'll turn our attention to the Caribbean. Now that our colonial army finished resupplying and replenishing its numbers, we can continue north towards Bahamas, another island chain held by our British enemies. But in the last episode, we learned that Bahamas are actually surprisingly well defended. There are 2 large army groups on the archipelago. First one protects Nassau, the capital of the region, while the other one keeps watch on major trading port. And that means that we cannot just land there and capture Bahamas in one go. Because the port is defended, we'll have to land our forces somewhere else, which will take significantly more time without proper infrastructure. And actually there was some disagreement between our commanders there. Our admiral wanted to land on the northern island and secure the port first, which would give his ships an option to resupply without taking a long trip back to Jamaica, and on the other hand, our general wanted to land south of Nassau, as this was the safest spot where our enemies wouldn't be able to surround our disembarking troops. Both plans had their supporters, but in the end General Horowitz convinced more officers to support his idea, and we landed south of Nassau. It will take us a while to organize our troops, and we will be vulnerable to counterattacks in the meantime, but at the very least we can only be attacked from one side. But we're still not done for this turn. After a few days of siege, our tribal warriors surrounding Stuttgart finally managed to convince Commander Mickiewicz to attack the city without waiting for reinforcements. After all, there is no glory in fighting one-sided battles. So, our warriors broke camp, gathered in one place, and marched towards Stuttgart when they found no one. The army defending the city used the time to slip away and managed to link up with the relief force coming from Strasbourg, a few days' march to the west. So now our warriors have a tough one ahead of them. The enemy is prepared and their forces outnumber our own. Let's see if that will be enough to stop our howling tide. And that's the last report from our colonial forces, Your Majesty. But, if I may, I know we were supposed to discuss our Italian campaign now, but shouldn't we prioritize the situation in Scotland? The matter of this mountainous wasteland is nowhere as important as our interests in southern Europe. It is true that we have lost this land, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, not in the long run. Pardon me, Your Highness, but I fail to understand how losing a portion of our home island can be a good thing. Which is why I am the Queen, Mr. Walpole, and not the other way around. The truth is that ever since Scotland joined our union, it has been nothing but a constant drain on our treasury. The land is poor and desolate, so the revenue from taxes is negligible, and far more gold is needed to simply keep these northern barbarians under control. Not a day goes by without some Highlander trying to kill our officials, and while it's true that some Scots join our forces, the vast majority of them still resents our rule. So, in a way, this Polish butcher does us a favour. If he wants to kill Scots, we lose nothing, and if they agree to his offer and join his army, then all the better for us. All our enemies will be conveniently gathered in one place, so our armies will swat them down in one strike. A calculating plot to be sure, Your Majesty, but don't you think you underestimate our enemy? The man clearly has a reputation, and from what I learned from our agents, he seems to have an uncanny ability to always come out on top, no matter how unfavourable the odds may be. If I wanted to listen to doomsayers, Mr. Walpole, I would have called King Friedrich. This Paul may have better resume than all our officers combined, but he's still just one man, commanding one army. Even with support of some of the more militant Scots, he won't be able to just march towards London without bleeding to death along the way, especially since our fleet will now ensure he won't receive any sort of reinforcements from home. Which reminds me, has Lord of the Admiralty been punished for letting our enemies slip through in the first place? Yes, Highness. I have his official resignation right here. Good. So now on to the most important matter of convincing our generals to abandon their lucrative posts in Spain and Italy and return to the Isles. Do you still have that list of eligible bachelors I ordered you to make when I took the crown? Good. Then do send a message to the more promising ones and tell them that the Queen is willing to reconsider their propositions, should they prove their worth in the Northern Highlands. After all, what better way to goad them into action than by waving the crown in front of their faces? I trust you will word the message in a bit more diplomatic fashion. Who am I kidding? Of course I do not trust you, Mr. Walpole. That's why I made you my Prime Minister. That way you have to report to me daily, which leaves little time for those schemes you enjoy so much. You may leave now. My servant will give you the letter once I write it myself. Just be so kind and do not send them all at once. Otherwise, I fear they may want to try and remove other candidates from this trial, and we do not want our lords to fight among themselves after all. Now, Commander Mickiewicz may be just a glorified butcher leading a horde of uncivilized barbarians on a rampage across Europe, but no one can deny that he can pick a perfect battlefield for his needs. Once again, we start on a hill, but this time it's even better positioned than in the last fight, because the vast majority of the terrain is actually too steep to move across, which should funnel our enemies right where we want them. Even better, we were able to place our artillery at the front of our formation without fear of enemy attack, and now those guns will have a perfect line of sight to just bombard Austrian forces that took refuge in a town right below us. And because we have that artillery advantage, Imperial forces will be forced to march towards us. Now, there is of course a risk that our force could just overwhelm us with cavalry, since our men are really weak against them, but to deal with that we'll simply send our archers forward to place their stakes on the approach, and this time we don't even have to worry about being intercepted in the middle of this task, because the main enemy force is still far away. But they actually took me by surprise by their swift advance. Clearly they were determined to link up with the garrison and fight as one unit instead of attacking us piece by piece. And this is actually a serious problem, because 1. Our enemies have highly mobile horse artillery with them, which they can now deploy to start harassing my formation, and 2. We're actually at severe disadvantage when it comes to cavalry, as our riders are severely outnumbered and outclassed by Imperial counterparts. As you can see here, I sent one unit of my mounted gunners to try and deal with Austrian cannons, but we were very quickly intercepted, and now we will have to commit to a very dangerous engagement, which we will most probably lose. So, of course, once Commander Mickiewicz realized that, he immediately gathered his staff and rode off to help, but because of the stakes we had planted, he will have to take a longer way around, and that will cost us even more men, because right now it seems our tribal horsemen are getting surrounded. So, our warriors realized they will probably fall here and decided to abandon the fight and just pushed on towards the enemy cannons, desperate to eliminate them before we are overwhelmed. But because we're dealing with horse artillery, our enemies simply rode off, and now we will have to deal with morale penalty for being attacked from all directions. And this actually proves to be too much for our warriors. Despite losing only a handful of men, they realize that hanging around will only lead to more casualties, and they break off. And what's surprising is that instead of retreating to regroup, our men just shatter and flee the field entirely. It seems that all the losses they took these past few months really took toll on their morale. As our riders fled, Imperial horsemen quickly realized that now they have a perfect opportunity to flank our position, and they decided to go for a very wide flank attack. Basically, they just rode past our formations towards the end of the battlefield, and impaled themselves on some stakes in the process. I think they wanted to ride around the hill and then suddenly appear right behind our men, but unfortunately we spotted their maneuver, and Mickiewicz took his last cav unit and rode there to intercept them. And as you can see, our enemies clearly were not expecting this, as their unit just desperately tries to move away from our commander. But since they're moving towards our other unit, soon they will have nowhere to run, giving us a chance to avenge our previous failed attack. So, with enemy horsemen taken care of, and with our artillery engaging in a long-range duel with their Imperial counterparts, our enemies decided that now it's a good time to push us off that hill. And once again, they had a good idea. I expected them to come at us through the town, attacking through choke points our formation could easily block. But instead, they gathered most of their forces on our right flank and attacked where the slope wasn't so steep. They lost the commander of the reinforcements to our cannon fire in the meantime, but it's not really going to change anything. This Austrian force, like the ones before them, is determined to regain the initiative in this war, and as such they have very high morale. At first I hope they will just engage us in a firefight, because despite our lower numbers we actually have an advantage there. Basically our musketeers keep enemy busy while our archers fire above them. But this enemy army must have learned their lessons from the survivors of our previous fight, because they just gave us a few volleys, lowered their bayonets and charged at our line, which of course is where they will have the upper hand, as, at least in a prolonged melee, well-disciplined and drilled line infantry will fare better than our enthusiastic but unruly warriors. We do have some archers on our left, who just wiped out another unit of enemy cavalry, and they will act as a flanking force, but it's going to be a while before they reach the main fight. And the rest of this battle will be just a bloody, constant grind where tactics won't really matter, and everything will be determined in a crazed, close-quarters combat. But while Austrian soldiers fight bravely, our warriors push them back step by step, leaving a trail of bodies, both ours and Imperial, all across the hill. The situation grows so desperate, and our enemies even move their artillery into the melee, probably to light their powder reserves on fire and blow our formation apart. But thankfully we managed to stop them before that happened. Still, if they're willing to go to such extreme measures, if they're willing to sacrifice their own men and guns just to cause us some damage, then it's clear that their situation must be really desperate. Then again, it's kind of understandable. After all, Austrian soldiers probably expected to be fighting regular European-styled army, and instead had to face this horde of howling, bloodthirsty savages, who, at this point, must have quite a reputation among our foes. So, no wonder they will do all they can to damage this army. They have a lot of their comrades to avenge. But, meter by meter, we managed to push Austrian forces back, and though we've taken heavy losses while we were at it, the battle is almost ours. Only one unit of armed citizenry remains, probably locals from this town and villages around, and now they're being charged from all sides by our flanking force. And as you can see, it's a dreadfully one-sided engagement. the enemy unit simply disappears under our attack, and after just a few moments they break, desperately trying to get out. But our warriors won't let them leave, and they just butcher that unit in a matter of seconds. Almost 500 Austrians lost their lives in less than a minute, and they managed to take only 2 of my warriors down with them. Nothing like ending a battle on a high note. It's a third victory for our American warriors and their commander, but as they march into Stuttgart to intimidate local population into surrender, one thing becomes evidently clear. Commander Mickiewicz and his men did an amazing job spearheading our offensive into Austrian lands, but with constant fighting their numbers simply melt away so fast that now this force can't really be considered combat worthy. And so the decision is made. Our native auxiliaries will no longer lead the attack, and instead will act as a supporting force to our other armies. Now, Mickiewicz and his warriors probably won't be too happy about this, but at this point, sending them anywhere on their own would just be a suicide. They will have to retreat to the second line and help out from there. So, with Stuttgart under our control, our campaign on the continent looks even better. Aside from Vienna, Austrian Empire only controls Transylvania, already under siege by the Ottomans, and Strasbourg, garrison of which we have soundly defeated in that last battle. But of course we can't be on the offensive all the time, and soon we learn that one of British armies has been recalled from Spain, disembarked in Northumberland, and marched north to Edinburgh to regain lands we've taken from them. And that army, commanded by one Rowan Chapman, is actually one of the better organized forces we've seen since this war began. Unlike British colonial forces we faced in Jamaica, this army is composed entirely of professional troops, including 2 companies of Grenadiers and Royal Irish Company, a very prestigious unit to be sure. They do have some outdated cannons with them, true, but aside from that, this actually might be a challenge Poniatowski is looking for, especially if we consider that we're going to be outnumbered here. And clearly, our enemies feel confident in their strength, because they waste no time on a siege and instead just attacked us as soon as they arrived. So, it looks like it's time for another fight, but this time finally against an enemy who can keep up with us. Unfortunately, we made some mistakes at the very beginning of this battle. Because our men didn't really bother with repairing the fortress, as it's going to be dismantled anyway, the breaches we've made in our assault last month are still here, and so I expected enemy army to deploy close to them, because that's the easiest and most obvious way into the fort. So, I placed most of my men inside the fortifications on the western side, ready to receive enemy attack, but General Chapman has clearly seen through this plan and instead ordered his troops to attack from the east, where I had almost no units, only one company guarding the gate. To make matters worse, I actually had my cavalry outside the fort on that side as well, and now we have to rush them to the other side before they're intercepted by the main British line. And as our men scrambled to reorganize themselves, General Poniatowski realized that he has immediately lost all initiative in this fight. We won't be able to reform our troops and present a solid defense on the eastern wall, so we'll have to abandon the outer defenses altogether and fight in the main square, where British numerical advantage might just give them an edge they need to win this fight. Soon, British forces realized the outer walls were undefended and began their advance, ready to surround the fort and climb the walls in as many places as they could, to make sure they can establish a foothold. And as their artillery shattered our bastions, our own guns finally fired back, delivering a payload of dreaded quicklime right to British infantrymen, wiping out over half a company in just one shot. But that was when our forces realized this battle is not going to be easy, as the survivors of this deadly barrage didn't even flinch. They ignored their burnt comrades, writhing in pain on the ground, stepped over them and continued their advance as if nothing happened. That is a clear signal. No matter what we'll do, the Redcoats are not going to give up easily, and we'll have to give our best in this fight if we want to see another day. Will Poniatowski and his men survive this assault, or will they be wiped out, the campaign cut short mere weeks after it began? We will learn an answer to that question in the next episode of the Crownless Eagle. I'll see you next time. As armies of the Commonwealth moved further south, it became evident that the war they are fighting is different from the ones they were used to. With every step they took, Republican soldiers expected to be attacked by overwhelming numbers of Europe-wide coalition allied to Austrian Emperor. But aside from sporadic, very ineffective counterattacks, taken out in most cases by Commander Mickiewicz and his force of tribal warriors, Commonwealth's advance into the heart of Holy Roman Empire was a peaceful one. For Austria, the reason for their toothless defense was obvious. After 12 years of indecisive struggle against the Ottomans, the empire was simply spent, both militarily and economically. Brave soldiers who could fight for their emperor were long dead, replaced instead by fresh young recruits commanded by the handful of jaded veterans, who somehow managed to survive and now were unwilling to throw their lives away for a cause they deemed lost. The situation was so desperate that even once elite regiments were now manned mostly by ill-trained conscripts, herded onto the battlefield with threats and violence. And with Emperor, his court and most importantly his treasury trapped in Vienna, Austrian armies found themselves constantly unable to pay their soldiers, which led to mass desertions all across the front, and, in the end, to armies of the Commonwealth capturing city after city without firing a shot. But while weakness of the empire was relatively obvious, then the lack of action from imperial allies was something most of the rank-and-file troops simply couldn't comprehend. They all heard the reports about armies of Venice, seemingly endless collection of well-drilled and battle-hardened mercenaries stationed just on the other side of the Alps. They all heard about Genoese fleets and threat they posed to Republican trade. Each Sunday they listened to letters from the Pope, full of thundering condemnations and threats of eternal punishment, and yet nothing happened. Even Great Britain, arguably the strongest member of the coalition, seemed more focused on their war with remnants of Kingdom of Spain and Americas than on the conflict back on the continent. And so, soldiers of the Commonwealth marched on unopposed, unaware that far away from the front lines, another war was fought in shady rooms and smoky inns. For the reason for lack of any military response to Commonwealth's advance proved to be surprisingly straightforward. It was simply too expensive to be in a state of war with the Republic. The nation that 15 years ago was on the brink of collapse transformed itself into an industrial and economic powerhouse, and by the time hostilities broke out, the Commonwealth controlled most of the trade on the continent, and was one of the major players on the global scene. With the declaration of war, the steady flow of cheap, mass-produced goods from Polish factories was halted, and within mere weeks, most of European powers found themselves struggling to keep their economies afloat. And so, although they all rallied to Emperor's banner, most members of the coalition immediately scrambled to make a deal with the Commonwealth to ensure a swift return to more profitable relations. And each day, the title of the Holy Roman Emperor and the old European order it represented grew more and more irrelevant in face of trade, industry, and gold.